Good morning and welcome to Designers at Home. I'm Mark Weaver. My guest today is going to be Leslee Mickelson, and she's going to be joining us from Honolulu. I think in these days of COVID, we're all looking for someplace to go and someplace to travel, and I can't imagine anywhere more wonderful than Honolulu. So, built in 1937, tobacco heiress, socialite, philanthropist, and surfer Doris Duke created Shangri-La. It was inspired by Doris's extensive travels throughout North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, and it reflects the architectural, artistic collections and designs from these regions. In 1965, Doris added a codicil to her will, calling for the creation of the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art, and its purpose was so that to promote the study and understanding of Middle Eastern art and culture. She passed away in 1993, and Shangri-La opened to the public in 2002. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our lovely guest today. Her name is Leslee Mickelson. Leslee is the curator of collections and exhibitions at Shangri-La. Previously, she consulted on the curation of the Bahmanian Cultural Center for UNESCO Afghanistan, and she was the head of curatorial and research at the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. She's also had internships and research roles at the Hermitage, the Louvre, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the National Museum in Kabul. And we're going to see if she's going to join us now. She also earned her Ph.D. in Islamic Art and Archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania. And she has so many accomplishments, I can barely list them. Good morning. How are you, Leslee?
Good morning. Aloha. How are you?
Aloha. What a treat to have you visiting us from Honolulu.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So I was just reading them a little bit about your bio. And in addition to what I've just said, she's also an art historian, archaeologist, cultural heritage manager, curator, and she's worked for more than 15 years on historic and contemporary projects in Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and recently she completed field work in Zanzibar and Azerbaijan. She has upcoming projects now in Singapore and Pakistan. So she's curated exhibitions from Qatar to London to Toronto. So I'm exhausted traveling with you. How do you do it?
Well, these days especially, that all sounds like Saturn, doesn't it?
Well, that's amazing. So this is a very interesting, I was fortunate about 2 years ago to visit Shangri-La, and it was a real treat and very memorable for me, and I'm looking forward to coming back. I want to talk a little bit about Doris and how she is the reason the museum today exists. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how it was built, the construction. It's really a fascinating story. However, Doris left in her will very strict instructions that this was to be a museum and this was not to be the focus of her, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So tell us, Leslee, how did Shangri-La come to be? Why was Doris so passionate about this particular location?
Right. Well, I think, you know, as you said in your introduction, I mean, we all think that we know who Doris is, this very well-known philanthropist who, of course, you know, the Duke family money is legendary in America, yes. Right? We have Duke University, we have now, of course, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. And I think it's really poignant to remember that she inherited that money when she was very young. Her father died when she was 12, and she was his only child, you know? So, and from a very early age, she had a massive responsibility. You know, she had lots of people surrounding her, wanting things from her, having to make very big decisions, you know, at a very young age.
Yes.
And I want us to keep that in mind because, you know, as we know, the honeymoon trip for her, so she married very young to a family friend, James Cromwell. And they embarked on this round the world honeymoon trip, right? And she was still a very young woman. She's 21, 22. And it was on that honeymoon trip that she first fell in love with Islamic architecture, right? Especially when they were in, it was pre-partition. So of course it wasn't India, but, greater India. And it was there that she really developed this lifelong fascination with the Islamic world. So it was her being present in these places. And she commissioned, when she was in Agra, some jalis. Those are carved marble screens. And they're used to allow for light and air to circulate while still respecting some kind of privacy. We see these in many cultures, of course. And she commissioned a series of hand-carved marble screens and these floral inlaid pietra dura, so inlaid stone panels that had botanical elements. Very similar, if anybody's been to the Taj Mahal, very similar to the decorations that you see in the Taj Mahal, because she was so captivated by that building, right?
Right.
So she actually worked with people, artisans, craftspeople from a workshop in Agra to commission this incredible suite of architectural ornament. And ostensibly, that was going to be sent to their winter house that was going to be planned to be built in Palm Beach, right? Because her husband, was from a society family in Florida, and they had already engaged the architect, Marion Sims Williams, who, of course, is probably most famous for designing Mar-a-Lago, right?
Right.
And so, they commissioned this, and then off they went to Hawaii, the last stop on this almost year-long trip. And they were supposed to stay here for a few weeks, and they ended up staying for months. Doris loved Hawaii. She felt relaxed. She felt that her privacy was respected, that people were warm but didn't care who she was. This was a woman who was really hounded a lot lot of her life. And
at that point, she was, 22 years old?
22 years old.
Right.
22 years old, and I think that, my heart breaks a little bit for her when I think about that. Here's this woman who has she was very close to her father. She lost him very young, and then is having to navigate these very big, very adult decisions, with not a whole lot of support, and who can understand her? No one's in the same position, And here she found a kind of solace, And she told James, I want the winter house to be here, not Florida. And he said, but you just ordered all of these things from India. And she said, we'll build a house around them. And I love that because, as we've discussed before, Mark, Doris didn't keep a diary. She didn't write many letters. She didn't annotate books or catalogs. And so the why she did things is very difficult to answer. You can talk to people who knew her and things, but that's hearsay. Like, we rarely hear from Doris directly. And this is one of the wonderful quotations that we have directly from her about the construction of Shangri-La. And I love that Shangri-La, which, by the way, of all of her homes, is the only one that she built. She inherited, extant structures.
Right.
That she built it after having been inspired by this trip to South Asia and this commission from contemporary craftspeople. And I think those two statements put Doris in a category completely disparate and separate from her peers. People were not traveling necessarily to these places, even if they had the means to do so. They were certainly not working with contemporary craftspeople, certainly not her peer group, right? And I love that sense of adventure and that sense of, independence that she demonstrated.
Yeah. And how long did it take her to complete Shangri-La?
Well, it depends what you mean. The architecture took about 3 years to do.
Right.
And so the building was finished in 3 years. But you could argue that Shangri-La was never finished because she continued in terms of the ornament of the interior and adding things and moving things around. She did that right up until her last visit shortly before her death in 1993. So really, from the time she was 22 until she died in her late 70s, this was a lifetime's labor of love. And it was also very private. Most of her society friends in New York never came here. They weren't invited. And she kept her collection of Islamic art here. So a lot of her friends didn't even know that she was such a patron of the arts of the Islamic world.
Right. So, and it was quite a feat building there at the time. I mean, there was a lot of, I guess during the construction, there were a lot of things done at that time that wouldn't be possible today. codes and, would not permit it. So
Yes.
it's quite a spectacular building. I remember the living room with the entire wall, which is a window that goes down into the ground.
Yes. Yes.
So,
I'm actually facing that right now.
right. And it looks out into the garden. It's just unbelievable. I mean,
Yes.
I wish my own house I could afford to do that. It's just,
Yes.
it's brilliant. And that must have been an amazing feat because it's sitting on rock, lava.
That's right. We are on lava bedrock. And
Yes.
the Otis company, that is a unique construction feature. They have never built another one. And
Right.
so all the parts and things, we actually work with the archivist from the Otis company because it's unique, right? It's this incredible piece of engineering. And we still open and close it every day.
Okay. So Leslie, per Doris's wish, we want to respect her wish and not dwell on her. So let's talk about the art and the collection, and that this is your expertise. So I have just a basic question. Why is Islamic art important? I think Americans tend to know very little bit about Islamic art and culture. Why do you think this is?
It's very interesting. As we've discussed, I look like this and I sound like this, but I've spent the majority of my working life in Muslim majority countries. And I've thought a lot about this question, and I think it's very reductive, Mark, but from my anecdotal experience, I think it's that for some reason in Western cultures, and by that I mean Europe, North America, Australia, the geographic centers of the Islamic world, because let's be clear, the Islamic world is of course global, right? But let's say the origin centers of the Islamic world, so the Middle East, North Africa, those have always been really othered, and it's really unfortunate because it's so untrue, I mean, we see traces of this through areas in which we are told are part of our shared cultural history, right?
Yes.
If you think back to your social studies classes in 6th and 7th and 8th grade and the Fertile Crescent and the origins of civilization, right? Mesopotamia, right? Egypt, right? Well, that's Iraq, that's Egypt, right? The eastern bits of the Roman Empire, right? Damascus being such a center for the Romans, right?
Right.
Well, those cities didn't move anywhere. It's just that the map shifted, right?
Right. History changes.
History changes, right? And so we went from saying, oh, these are the origins of shared culture history to, oh, we have nothing in common with these people, right? And of course, it's just ridiculous. There's a constant globalization. There's a constant globalism, let's say. Trade, I mean, I'm half Norwegian. And I remember as a child being taken to a museum in Norway by my father. And there was a collection of coins on display, and I was too young to really understand, but I know now that they were dirhams, right? So because of the trade that was circulating up the Volga, and the Vikings who served as Varangian guards in the Byzantine Empire. So this idea that somehow in the past people only spent, they only went within 5 miles of their house, that's not necessarily true. People who were privileged, people who were part of the military, there was long distance travel, merchants. And then even if you couldn't physically travel, of course, objects travel and ideas travel, right? And we see this, I mean, look through the work of Shakespeare. There are constant references to the trade that's happening with the Middle East. We have wonderful letters that Queen Elizabeth I wrote to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, right? So this idea that somehow the Islamic world has always been, verboten in some way, it's actually just not true if you break it down. There's been constant communication, right? And I think sometimes also, I'll say this and then stop. I think also we are very anachronistic about the past. We take current socio-political realities and project them in the past, which of course is reductive and unhelpful because the current interaction is actually much less, I think, certainly conceptually, than it would have been in the past.
Yes. So Doris was just enchanted with Hawaiian Eastern culture and art. So how did you become interested and fascinated with the same thing? And how did you end up at Shangri-La?
That's a great question. So the short answer to why I study Islamic art is I trained in Western art history as an undergrad, and I knew I wanted to do grad work, but I wasn't sure in what. And for personal reasons, I ended up living in Istanbul for 3 years. And when I first went to Istanbul, I'll never forget it. It was February, it was snowing, and Hagia Sophia was like glowing in the dark. And I thought, and at that point I had a master's in art history. And I thought, I know this city until Byzantium, but I don't know the city after Byzantium, I'd never taken any classes on Islamic art. They weren't even offered, And so I just started to dig into what I was seeing around me in my new home. And that's when I got really excited about Islamic art and architecture and decided to pursue my PhD in that. And then Hawaii, I'd been living abroad and I was looking to come back to the States. And it's great. It's actually perfect because of, you so kindly in your introduction talked about the very kind of chaotic nature of my background. I'm a quirky kind of curator. I do archaeology, I do cultural heritage. I'm very interested in craft and supporting local craft. And I do art history. And not all museums welcome that, quite frankly, you know. I really push against the boundaries of what's considered fine art versus craft. I'm very interested in design, and Shangri-La, I think, is one of the only places that warmly welcomes all those facets of what I do, because this place is like that. Doris was collecting fine art. She was working with craftspeople. She was working with contemporary artists, and I think that the fit is really, really good. And also for somebody who spent most of my life abroad, it's Hawaii, right? So it's the States, but not really, So it's been
you're in paradise. I'm very envious. So let's talk a little bit about the collection, because, when Doris started this, she was purchasing a lot of this because she loved it, and it became decoration and architectural elements for her home. And
Absolutely.
Later on in her career, she was collecting pieces so she would expand her art collection. And this includes wood and glass, ceramics. What other types of things are in the collection?
Some very spectacular jewelry, as you can imagine. We have some incredible jewelry from the Mughal period in South Asia. Incredible pieces, which Doris often wore, right? Which was kind of fantastic, right? We have a great textiles collection as well. She was very interested in textiles. And again, things that people weren't collecting, things like Susanese, which are needlework, cotton and silk needlework, mostly from Central Asia. You would recognize these motifs now. They had a real moment a few years ago, with ikat and things like that. But nobody was collecting Susanese in the 1930s except Soviet dissidents who were exiled to Central Asia. And she was collecting them, right? And we have a really spectacular collection of ceramics. The ceramics collection here is astonishing. And I'm seated in front of one example.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what's behind you. This piece is the star of the show, isn't it?
It is the star of the show. So I'm going to move the camera so people can actually see it a bit better. This is our mihrab. And the mihrab is a niche. It's it's a visual element, which indicates the direction of Mecca for people who are praying, right? This is a very special one. You can see how it kind of shimmers in the light. This is called Lusterwear. And it was a very expensive, fancy kind of ceramic that was made primarily in Iran in the 13th century. And it was a very special recipe that only a few families selfishly guarded, right? And this is signed and dated by the artist, which is very exciting. It's from 1265. It is one of 6 mihrabs in Lusterwear that survive in the present day. And 4 of those are in Iran still, at the Iran Bastan Museum in Tehran. And 1 is in the Museum for Islamische Kunst in Berlin. And this is the 6th. It's the largest. It's the most complete. And Doris purchased this in 1940 from Hagot Kevorkian, the noted antiques dealer in New York. And people seem to like this piece. And she actually defeated the Met to buy this piece. The Met really wanted to buy this piece, and Doris won, right? And it was installed in 1940 in Shangri-La. And of course, we also know what happened in 1940 in Hawaii. So after Pearl Harbor was bombed, the mihrab was taken down in a hurry by people who were working here. And of course, were not fluent in Arabic. And they didn't really number the pieces. And so when they put it back after World War II was over, the inscription is out of order, right? The tiles around the outer edge, you can see some of the inscription tiles right here. They're not actually in correct order. And people have asked me, are you going to change that? And absolutely not. And this is what I really love about Shangri-La. Most museums would be like, oh, it's not correct, change it immediately, right? But at Shangri-La, it's like, that's part of the object biography of this,
Right,
you know,
the history.
The history of the piece.
Right.
And digitally, you know, on our website, we're going to digitally stitch together, you know, a photo rendering of how it should look in terms of the correct order of the inscription, so that, you know, we want to make sure that people know that,
Sure.
you know, that they have the correct information. But we love this. We love that it's part of the story of
That's a
Shangri-La.
spectacular piece, and the
Right?
history is great. So, Leslie, you just gave us a little teaser behind you, and I could see part of the room behind you. Are you able to walk us just
Sure.
a little bit around so that people
Sure.
can see? I want people to see what Shangri-La is and how exciting it is.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I will just give you one caveat and one
Yes.
piece of information. One is that the museum is, of course, closed. We're going to open in the spring, inshallah, back to the public. But so the museum is not dressed, as it were, for guests, right? So, you know, the shades are down and some things are covered. The other thing is that we recently installed, just 2 days ago, a show of contemporary artwork by Hawaii-based artists. It's called
Right.
8x8, and there are 8 visual artists whose work is in the space, and then there are going to be 8 performance artists who are also going to be working. So if you follow Shangri-La on Instagram, you'll be able to learn more about this exhibition when it launches officially in 2 weeks.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great
Good.
show. And I'm telling you this because one of the pieces by a photographer called Brandon Ng is actually suspended on the window that we were just discussing. And
Oh.
so they are textile cyanotypes of endemic plants of Hawaii.
Okay.
So you're going to see that. And so I wanted to let you know that you're going to see something just on the jolly. But yes, I will now flip it so that you can see. So this is the living room. So I'm standing with my back to the jolly. This is the view directly towards that incredible window that we were talking about. I'll come to the center of the room and then I'll turn so you can see. So this is our fireplace. And
the grills are beautiful.
yes, so these are additional jolly. So these are mashrabiyah, which is the Arabic form of jolly. They were made by craftsmen in Morocco, as was our ceiling. This incredible hand
The ceiling is just unbelievable. Yeah.
It's astonishing. And this is this incredible full-length window from Otis that does go into the floor, the whole way into the floor. And through this, you can see our garden, our cascade, our swimming pool, and our playhouse, which was where guests would stay when they came to visit Doris. And this is the view down to our playhouse. Hi, Jerry. Jerry's one of our grounds workers.
Oh,
this is
so spectacular.
Of course, you can see Leslee or Diamond Head in the distance. And we are right beside the Pacific Ocean.
And Leslie, what was the inspiration for the gardens there at Shangri-La?
Right. So this pavilion that we're looking at was inspired by a palace in Safavid in Iran that was built in the Safavid period in the 7th century. And so there's a deep Persian influence to this building, right? But then we have another garden outside which is inspired by the and in Iran in terms of the plantings that she had in the landscape, right? This is the central courtyard, and this also mostly details tile work from Iran, and it's a mix of purchases as well as commissions, right? And of course, it's a, you know, almost like a James Turrell kind of skyscape here we have in the open courtyard. So as you can see, it's full of wondrous things, this museum. And this tile panel is really, really special. It looks incredibly historic, of course. But this was actually made in the early 20th century by craftspeople in Isfahan. And we know exactly who made this. We have photographs of all of the artisans. And one of the artisans' granddaughters contacted us last year and sent us an amazing photograph of the men who put together that piece for Doris. Before it was shipped to Hawaii from Iran. And it was just this really spectacular photo of the 25 people who were involved in constructing that mosaic. And I'm going to take you now into our Ottoman Gallery.
Oh, this was one of my
And
favorite spaces.
yes, so these are some of the spaces in the museum. And what I love about this space is, first of all, just the incredible decor. I mean, these are the fitted walls, and then the spectacular, again, wooden ceiling, which is just astonishing. This is called ajami, and ajami is a lacquered and gilded polychrome wood treatment. And I'll try and give you some detail shots so you can see some of the incredible detail of this room. So this is from a family, a prominent family in Damascus, Syria, right? And what I love about this space is that, I mean, you know, a lot of people come here and they want to pretend that this is how Doris lived, right? Like, oh, you know, lounging in a kaftan on this incredible settee, right? But that's right. But this room, for much of Doris's life, was her billiards room, and the adjacent space was a powder room, right? And you can see this room is so above was her office, right? And so very late in her life, when she had written her will and she knew that Shangri-La was going to be a museum, she had purchased this suite of this room, this interior, and had it fitted. So she knocked out her office, she knocked out the billiards room, she knocked out the powder room, and created this incredible fitted Damascene interior, and complete with the vitrines that you saw, you know, with objects in the vitrines. And so I really like to talk about this space when we talk about the transformation of Shangri-La from a private home to a museum.
To a museum, right.
Exactly, because Doris started that. Right.
Oh, that's
she was,
wonderful.
You know, she was, I mean, for lack of a better term, museumifying the space because she knew what her vision was for this. And
Right.
so this is why I feel very confident in our decisions in the museum, because I feel like we're very much following in the footsteps that she began. And I think this gallery is a really lovely way to see that, to see her wishes
Right.
in action, to see her love of her collection and her desire for it to be on display.
Right. So, Leslee, you're responsible for bringing new works into the collection. And how do you go about deciding what is appropriate? And do you look to local artisans in the Hawaii area, or do you look for global artists? What are you looking for?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's one of the parts of my job I love the most. So our historic collection is finished, right? So we do not collect historic artwork. We are very similar to other peer institutions, one of which is the Gulbenkian, in which our founders collection is complete, right? So we don't add to the founders collection. But we do collect contemporary art. And as we've discussed, we have a really vibrant program for artists in residence. So 3 to 4 visual artists per year are hosted at Shangri-La. It's invitation only. And we collect from the artists in residence.
Yes.
And some of our artists in residence recently are, I mean, we've had some incredible artists work with us. Hayat Kahraman, Bahia Shahab, Faik Ahmed. It's been a really spectacular experience. And the funny thing is, no one ever says no.
Well, I'm sure once they see where their art is being showcased, it's a piece of cake.
Well, I'm also very sneaky. In the initial email, in the subject line, I always put potential residency in Honolulu, and so we have a good success rate. I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but not much. So that really is up to me to bring to our executive director. So I select the artists that we invite, and I spend a lot of time in non-COVID years. I spend a lot of time at art fairs and traveling to different places on the planet to try and discover some artists that we'd like to work with. And we try to have a balance of established and emerging artists. Shangri-La is free from a lot of the financial constraints that our peer institutions have. And so we can be bold. We don't have to have, I mean, I hate this term, but we don't have to have a blue chip artist, you know.
Right,
we can
right.
someone who's more emerging in his or her career because we don't care about ticket sales, you know. And so I feel we have a moral and ethical responsibility to really support talented artists who don't have the kind of global spotlight that they may deserve. So that's a real pleasure.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So you have exhibitions, you've had past exhibitions, current exhibitions, I'm assuming, are on hold, but tell us about some of the upcoming exhibitions that you're working on.
Right. So, well, the 8x8 show that I mentioned is our first time working with Hawaii-based artists because,
right.
you know,
unapologetic. We are working to advance the cultures and peoples of the Islamic world, but we also want to be a good community partner and a neighbor. And the art scene here in Honolulu is a little bit strange. There's not really a big commercial gallery scene at all. Most of the openings I go to are in bars and coffee shops, you know, and I thought, well, I work in a museum and we have walls, and occasionally we can offer that space to artists.
Right.
So a museum on their resume instead of a coffee shop, you know. And so 8x8 hopefully will be an annual event so that we will offer space to artists of the community for, you know, a short period of time. We are also working with an artist in residence right now. His name's Kamran. He happens to be based here, but he earned his spot just like everybody else, right? And we planned this all pre-COVID. It has just been very serendipitous that I could continue working with him this year. And we have a gallery down at the Honolulu Museum of Art. And so he has an exhibition there because the Honolulu Museum of Art, we call it HOMA. HOMA is open to the public right now. And so if anybody's based in Hawaii, they can go and see Kamran's exhibition there right now until August. And then his exhibition at Shangri-La will open in March and again run until August. And then next year, I'm trying to Tetris all of the artists who had been scheduled for 2021 and 2022 and 2023 to see how we can fit them in our schedules, because as soon as it's safe and appropriate to do so, we definitely want to restart our residency program. It's really important to us.
Well, that's great. So outside of the US, where do you think we see the best examples of notable art and architecture, Islamic art and architecture? I know you've mentioned the Taj Mahal. Everybody's familiar with this structure. Sure.
Oh, that's such a good question. I think for me, I'm very keen on, because my own area of research is Central Asia. So I'm always very much a champion of areas that are seen as peripheral, you know? I mean, I think, you know, I don't need to tell anybody to go to Istanbul or to go to Cairo or to go to Damascus. I mean, these are things that, you know, people, I think, understand the cultural richness that awaits them there.
Right.
But, you know, Singapore at the Asian Civilizations Museum has one of the most incredibly curated collections of Islamic art I've ever seen. It's one curator working by herself, and she redid those galleries very recently. And, you know, we hear a lot about, you know, when the British Museum redoes their galleries or the Met redoes their galleries. And you know, respect to that, that's incredible. And I have many good friends at both places. But this person did it completely on her own, you know, and it wasn't, you know, there was not a big article about it in, you know, international newspapers. And it's astonishing. And I think really gets us to look at Islamic art through a very different lens in terms of geography. Yes. Because Southeast Asia is a key part of the Islamic world. The most populous Muslim nation is Indonesia, right? So the Pacific is a very important port of call. And so I would say the Asian Civilizations Museum in Singapore is astonishing. I would really encourage people to go to Central Asia. Uzbekistan is basically an open air museum, certainly for Timurid architecture. And I would also like to reassure people who might be nervous that Uzbekistan is one of the places that is the easiest on the planet to get around as a tourist. It is so accommodating, and you can take a very comfortable train from Tashkent to Samarkand to Bukhara to Khiva and then back to Tashkent. It's an amazing country, and I think very, very under visited, certainly by Americans. And then I would also say West Africa, I think, has an astonishing tradition, which of course differs very deeply from the more central Islamic lands. But, you know, Mali, Senegal have their own, incredibly rich, deep traditions that are maybe expressed in ways that are different than people are accustomed to seeing in a museum. But that's why it's so important that I think they be seen, because of course museums are not holders of truth, right? They're holders of personal taste.
Right.
Because what we play is, of course, the personal collection of, in our case, one, in other, multiple donors, right? But that's it. There's no such thing as an encyclopedic collection of Islamic art. And so I think in order to really flesh out our understanding of this very global, very heterogeneous set of cultures, it's really important that we maybe start in museums, but that branch out to areas of the world that are so important to the study of this field, but yet so rarely represented in museum collections.
Right. Our guests, I'm sure, are going to be fascinated. Everybody is always able to go online and explore Shangri-La and its collection. Tell us, what is the, is it best to do this through Instagram or their website?
We have
workers, so I'm going to step away from the noise. We have refreshed our website recently, and so if you go to our website, you will be able to find all of our collection that's on display. So any artworks that are on display are available on our website. We don't yet have our works in storage on our website, but we plan to do that over the course of the next year. We're also very active on Instagram, so it's a good idea to follow us on Instagram because we share our programs and our collections there regularly. And of course, I'm very willing to for you to share my contact information with your audiences. I'd be really happy to answer any questions that anybody has, or if people have particular research queries, I'd be delighted to support those.
Oh, that's very generous of you, Leslie. Thank you.
With pleasure.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating. I could spend a lot of time walking around the museum with you. I know on my next trip, I'd love you to take me on a tour, and I'm sure I'd see it very differently through your eyes next time.
It will be a great pleasure, Mark.
Anyway, thank you so much, Leslie. It was a thrill, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Take care, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha.
So I hope you all enjoyed our brief little visit of Shangri-La and our visit with Leslie. She's incredibly knowledgeable, and I encourage you to go on the website and explore. So in 2 weeks, my guest is going to be Randy Salokian. Randy is one of Santa Barbara region's most illustrious real estate leaders, and over a period of 3 decades, his sales include some of the most legendary estates in the area. He's fascinating, and I think you're going to love listening to Randy, so please join us. Now, if you can't join us on these Instagram Live, you can join us any time of day. You can go on our Instagram, you can go on our YouTube or blog under Mark Weaver and Associates and listen to any of these chats. So thank you for joining us, and from the wonderful world of design, I am Mark Weaver. Bye-bye.